go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody. For those who don't know, who haven't been to one of the open hours, I'm Cassandra Ferris. I am the Salt Stack Community Manager, which involves a lot of things, but a lot of my role is focused on helping the community and the core team collaborate more effectively. These open hours are meant to be a conversation between community and the Salt core team, and in a lot of these times, we wind up addressing your frequently asked questions, things that you're curious about. Everybody can suggest topics. In the last few weeks, there have been a lot of questions and talk about what does our release process look like and what direction is SALT headed, questions about testing process, all sorts of things. And so for this open hour, we've decided to spend the whole hour focusing on kind of the direction of SALT, the direction of release process, answering some of your questions. We will be recording this, and we will have 2 sets of notes as well that we're taking from this open hour so people can refer to it later. And there's a chance that some of the material of this probably will wind up as part of the contributor guide that we're working on. So Mo is going to be leading the conversation today, and I will hand things over to him.
Thank you, Cassandra, and thank you everybody for joining today and for actually bringing this particular topic to the forefront, of the discussion that we'll have at today's open hour, but of course, at a variety of ongoing sessions that we may have in the future. A topic like this, of course, is broad and can cover many things, and it's hard to ever, give a topic like this, justice or do justice by it in the spectrum of a compressed time. But hopefully we will be able today to address some of the key questions and the comments that came up through the various forums. And what the team and I had done is essentially try and zoom in a little bit more on areas that we think are relevant, but always, of course, encourage everybody to please, guide us, help us think through what other domains we want to deep dive into, etc., and we'll be happy to do that. For those who I have not had the pleasure of meeting in the past, my name is Mo. I lead the engineering organization at SaltStack. I've been here a little under a year and a half with the organization. Had the privilege of working through a variety of software engineering projects for over 20 years and quite a few in open source. Prior to joining SaltStack, relative to the open source, I had a team that was managing the Open Whisk project. We were involved in Kafka, and we had a very, very long history in OpenStack, among other things. So how did we divide this particular topic? Well, we've, and I should check, are you able to see my screen? Wonderful, okay, thank you. We've divided this topic into really 3 sections. I'm hoping that we'll be able to go through that in roughly, 30, 35 minutes, and then we'll open it up, of course, for more questions and more dialogue. Throughout this session, please feel free to post your questions on the chat section so we can go back into them and make sure that we address them. And if you really feel the urge to step in and ask a question in between, please don't hesitate. Feel free to do that as well. The intent for all of these is to always for them to be a dialogue, although I know that we have quite a bit of content to go through. So the first section will just cover quite a bit of our community vision, mission, goals, and commitment. We recognize that in the last year we've actually had many new to SALT team members join. By an estimate of at least a recent sort of survey that our product team has done, well, we believe that we have over 1,500 new to SALT users that have joined our Slack channels and our community channels, and you see them asking quite a bit of those questions. So it's a good sort of a reminder to think through our open community, how we view ourselves, and what we as a collective community have come about to try and do together. The second section will dive into the processes. We'll talk about our community process, our release process, things that we're doing today, things that we're focused on tomorrow. And then we actually are going to close off with a section that goes through very specific and pointed comments that were made and or actual questions that had surfaced prior to this call, so that we make sure that we don't miss the chance to answer them, but also, of course, to tackle those particular topics with appreciation, of course, for those who have raised them. That's really at the heart of any community, is how people engage and are part of it. Okay, so let's just jump right in to it. So first, SALT started, and SALT is at its heart, a community-built open source project. As a community, we've really come together to establish SALT as the leading platform for infrastructure automation and management. This journey started, over 8 years ago, with the inception of the early configuration and remote execution capabilities, and has since then, through the community effort, grown to tackle many more environments, more platforms, add capabilities around event management, explore new domains like networking, and so on and so forth. For us as a community, that's what we come. We want to be the leading platform for infrastructure automation and management. And we want to do so under the guise of understanding the changing environment. So in the past, it might have been centered around servers, the expansion into the data center properties. And we see a vision in the future that includes, current critical environments like cloud, containerized, setups, but also IoT and even further down the road. And we believe that as a community, we have the skill, the talent, and the passion to do so. Within every community, there is a core team that is tasked with, supporting the community, working on ensuring that the project continues to be vibrant, to be, maintained, and so on and so forth. That particular group is called the core team, many of whom you've interacted with, who are on this call, and I'll come in a moment and actually shed more light as to who behind the scenes is part of that organization. But the core team has a mission that is in line with the community objectives. And its mission is really to unite this global open source community to help us collaborate, facilitate communication, pair skills to be able to build and secure and maintain this particular project. But ultimately, the core team comes together, wakes up every morning with a singular focus, which is how can we continue to make the community successful, and how can we continue to build towards that vision of building, a leading platform for infrastructure automation. The driver for this core team is from the community and to the community. This particular project has the unique characteristic of frankly being used at a global scale. We have very successful institutions that build and deliver software that use SALT Open as part of its core. We have people who rely single-handedly on SALT to manage their infrastructure. We have a distribution and distro providers who leverage SALT as part of what they do. We have even cloud platforms at scale who rely on SALT. So that whole active and vibrant community is a great source of what needs to come next. And it's really the singular and most influential source into what we do in terms of our roadmap and what we deliver against. When we think about the SALT community, every community runs by a set of values. Our first and foremost value that we've established, recognizing where we are as a mature project that is 7, 8 years old, is that like any community, it needs great communication. So we believe in community participation. We seek community participation, and we're consistently being very open and transparent, both about where we're going, where we're heading, what our issues and mistakes are, and we are constantly trying to improve on that. Now, it is not a secret to recognize that SALT started with a model, and that model is, a dictator-driven, the benevolent dictator model that tried to ensure consistency and quality of the design points. But it was also no secret that we've been on a journey to try and open up and mature our processes to really allow them to be community-driven. So communications is a critical value that we live by for that purpose. Action. one of the observations that we recognize, and it's a value that's critical to us, is that communities can fall into, this sort of complacent or happy place of just debate and dialogue with no action. We set ourselves a critical, bar that says one of our critical values is action. That we decide, we move, we don't let things linger, and we recognize that when we made a decision and moved, but we might make a mistake. We are tolerant of mistakes, but we are not tolerant of repeating the same mistakes over and over. So you'll find that we as a community understand that there is an error that could have occurred, and we'll fix it and we'll be transparent about it. But you hopefully will also see that from a community values perspective, we're one that wants to not repeat the same mistake over and over again. Teamwork, there is no community without teamwork. We recognize and value that, frankly, in order for us to deliver exceptional experiences, both on the human level, the user, the contributor, and so on, but also in folks who consume the technology, we really need to do a lot of teamwork with ourselves, with partners, with the community members, with those who use the software, and so on. And so without that, we do not have a community. So this isn't an idea of there's a singular group of people who drive this community and that's how we succeed. We succeed by teamwork. We also recognize that our community is very diverse, and we will always have differences of opinions and differences of approaches. And somebody's particular need may be more priority or more important than somebody else's. So part of teamwork is to arbitrate for the benefit of the greater community. And that's partly what we do and we stand for and we stand by as a value, is teamwork with the understanding that we arbitrate for what we think will work best for the majority of the community. And then finally, of course, is fun and respectful environment. This isn't something that you brush off. These projects can get tense, people can get passionate, moments can get a little bit heated. People depend on SALT. It's a critical infrastructure software. So we want to recognize the seriousness of the work we do, but also we want to have fun while we're doing it and be respectful. There are moments in time when communities can get down into pointed attacks or a climate that's a little bit hostile. That's not something we stand for. It's not something we will tolerate at all. And so as a community, we rally together to create that environment. So are we committed to this project, or is it kind of like 7, 8 years? Oh my God, it's stagnant. Absolutely not. This particular organization, SaltStack, has been incredibly committed to the SALT project. And as somebody that can speak from a point of experience and a point of relevance to other projects that I've worked on, I see us as an organization committing on an ongoing basis, and we continue to invest in making sure that the SALT Open project succeeds. And it's one of those prominent attributes of what makes SaltStack is the success of its open community. I've seen comments come through around, oh, there's contention with enterprise and so on and so forth. So I want to take this opportunity to both shed light on our teammates, those who are working every day, wake up worrying about the open community and its success, but also around what does this mean relative to SaltStack and to other projects that I worked on. So first, the SALT core team is the largest part of our engineering organization, by far, compared to the rest of our commercial setup. So for those who are wondering whether SaltStack moves resources out or so on and so forth, I want to categorically put it out there. We do not. We have more than 17 names in here. We recognize that some people are only part-time, like Joe, who might have drifted in and out because of his experience. But everybody on this list wakes up every day in the morning with a sole dedicated purpose of making the SALT Open project succeed. Contributions, maintenance, and so on and so forth. Bryce leads a lot of our SRE effort. He was one of the original founders and continues to work in terms of improving things like our Jenkins. Cassandra, who was our, one of our latest, leads added into the project, has come in with the sole sort of purpose of community management and bringing that cohesion, for a community as large as ours. Chad is one of our developers who's been with us, started as part-time and moved over into a full-time basis. and really been working on a variety of the PRs, windows, and some more of the complex issues that we find. DWise is a senior and seasoned member of our organization, who leads the development of many of our most critical updates and upgrades. Derek is a dedicated documentation writer who joined us more recently and is really going to take the helm of making sure that we improve and work on the doc side. Dimitri, has been with us in the project for a while, and he's also one of our seasoned, developers who continues to work through the backlog of our PRs and issues and helping, the community maintain. Frode is focused on testing and a lot of the QA efforts. Gareth, again, one of our seasoned developers, also has been working closely with the Macworld groups amongst other areas, but also venturing into the networking space. Jaren is an SRE that we added to help Bryce, again, in the process of automation and building pipelines. Joe is coming with expertise around Windows. He's been working closely with Shane on that side. Curl is a very seasoned SRE and test lead. He splits his time between the two. Strong experience in the FreeBSD community amongst others, and a user of Salt, and has come in to help us actually mature our processes. Megan, again, one of our seasoned and senior developers who's been with us for a long time. You've interacted with Megan on many, many projects, including things like SSH work, amongst others. Pedro, of course, has been with the project for a very long time. He's, again, a very senior member of the team that's really built much of our test infrastructure and is on an ongoing basis helping us improve that through the efforts of the testing work group. Sage, who's really been with us now in a dedicated fashion for a good part of 6 months as our release manager, who's trying to bring a lot of discipline to the release process that she used to run on the commercial side, and bring that experience, both from her Salt stack, but also from her other roles from prior to that. Shane, who works on Windows, as we talked, and leads actually that particular work group. Tyler, who's worked very diligently on the Salt Cloud aspects, amongst others, leads triage, helps with the PRs. Wayne, who's again a seasoned and a very senior member of our team, who's come to try and help again with establishing and working a good part of what you would call release, quality, as well as, of course, the backlog of the discipline of our coding, things like blackening the code, etc. And of course, Tom, who is our founder and continues to be closely watching, shaping, and thinking through the vision of the future for our project. And then lastly, myself, in terms of the overall management from that side. I take time here, team, to share this because it's really critical and incredibly important to get to know our colleagues and to understand the depth of skill and experience and the bench of folks that we have on this project. Salt Open is in the top 50 projects in GitHub worldwide, and it is backed up by an incredibly amazing group of folks who work closely with the community, who is also incredibly amazing in their contributions day in, day out, and their passion for this project. So this group, what are we focused on for 2020? When we came into 2020, we said, what are the things that are critical for us as a core team to go and work on and support? Well, first, we recognize that we sort of had waves in terms of how we worked as a community. We had a wave of everything being very restricted, to a wave of everything being opened up, to a wave of like, hang on a second, we went a little bit too far and things are just falling apart, so let's restrict things. And how do we kind of modulate to get into a stage that is a little bit more stable? And the current challenge that we're focused on is how do we help everybody get into a stage where they can contribute fast, merge fast, and merge confidently, knowing that when they put in their PR, it's going to run through the process. It's not going to hit, any of these release types of issues. How can we get the community to have more of a say into what we do? How can we help people understand what's really going on? So what's in the release? What's working? What's coming up next? Is this thing in or not? And remove this sort of, I put something in and I really have no idea what's going on. Improve the quality of and the code base stability. So that's an ongoing journey. Do we think we're testing enough? No. Are we testing all of the core modules? No. Do we have, golden topologies that we feel confident that if we pass them, how do we do a lot of that? And then ease and accelerate onboarding. Given a lot of our new community members, how do we make it easy for them to understand how they can contribute? How do we accelerate the process of them just knowing what's going on and staying in touch and becoming part of the community? So that's a high-level view of all of those aspects that I think are critical for us to sort of have as a foundation before we venture into what a development process is and how are we working towards that. So let's get into what is our process. What have we laid out? And I'm going to, as I said, cover a variety of things and then get into some very specific areas in terms of details. To start with, I want everybody to understand that one of the journeys we've been on is to try and unify our processes. We've had multiple processes that go on, as in the open project works differently from other open projects or industry best practices. Our open projects work differently from enterprise and how we can harmonize a lot of that. The bringing together of all of this and adoption of some industry best practice is what we label the SALT method. Taking the best of what's out there, but making it work for ourselves. So the first thing that we've done is we went out there and we looked at other open projects and we said, what works, for this type, something similar to our project, something that the same age and size of our project, something that has the same sort of deployment model of our project. What are some of the best practices out there that we can inherit? And we essentially came down into recognizing that our best model of working, given the state of things, is essentially a combination of spiral development, which really is a model of working through a prototype, developing the prototype and getting feedback, enhancing that prototype until you get at a point where you can build a true minimum viable product, something that people can work with, and then you put all the right rigor around that minimum viable product. So that's a concept of spiral development, which is adopted by many projects, is something that we've embraced and worked around now inside of SaltStack. We combine that with some other practices. So for example, we're at the early stages of applying things like test-driven development. That's not there yet, but we're working our way towards this. But we've fully got into the idea of minimum viable products, user-based and persona-based development, and centering ourselves around delivering small chunks that are complete. Complete meaning development complete, test complete, docs complete, as opposed to we just get the coding and ship it out and let the docs catch up later. So this whole method is a journey that we're on. We started it, one would say in full earnest about 6 months ago, maybe about 7-8 months ago, and we're now on our second cycle with it. Sodium was the first, magnesium is the next one in its full sort of cycle, and so on and so forth. But it's also the same for our enterprise side. Now, I mentioned something around our SALT method, which is it's anchored and driven by personas. It's really important to recognize that as a company and as a community, we understand that we have a growing base of users that we need to think through. While many have common needs, some have very unique specific needs. When we think about Ivan, this is the bread and butter of the IT ops user. He's sort of been the center of the world for SaltStack and continues to be. But as we venture out into new areas like security, we're recognizing that persona, the fact that they have a very different interaction model and so on and so forth. We recognize that a network operations person has a different mindset than an IT Ivan. There are subtle intricacies that the platform needs to support that are different. But what's important for today's conversation is to also recognize that we think of our community contributor, who we call Chloe, the persona that resembles everybody listening to this call and actively contributing to the project, as a first-class persona. It's a persona that informs our thinking, it's a persona that drives our priorities, and it's a persona that we put in front of every day in our lenses, and we think, what are we going to do to make the life of Chloe better? We translate that when we come to each release cycle into sets of goals and sets of outcomes that we measure ourselves against. An outcome is, for example, us recognizing that community Chloe can push her PR and get a test result back in less than 20 minutes, enabling her to have more rapid iterative development experience. That is something that we set and we work towards. It can fall down into a variety of things. We need to improve our tests. we need to automate a particular piece, we need to open up the merge write cycle and so on. But the ultimate goal is that we declare a particular release cycle successful when the experience of Chloe has been improved under that guise. Those materials are going to be available to everybody, so you can read through a lot of these things. But when we looked at it, we understand that we have tech debt items such as Tornado that everybody's been asking us for. So prioritize that and get that out of there. And that's sort of a feature function. We understand that there is more groundwork that needs to be done, for example, to enable Salt to participate in a SaaS environment, which is a little bit more of a long term. So let's put some R&D thinking on that and work with the Salt Cloud project to start to sort of implement some of these things. But we also understand, the notion of how to make the self-open team a little bit more self-sustaining, a little bit more empowered through the virtue of the Chloe persona, as an example. So we talked about spiral development. In its simple notion, it runs around an idea that is built into a concept that gets into a design that we iterate on in the development side, and then we work into taking a subset of what we've developed and deliver it based on readiness, quality, et cetera, Nothing radical in here, things that everybody understands and adheres to. Our development to deliver cycle is very phased. It goes from the coding side to the validation side to the packaging and then promoting it. Of course, all of these elements before around ideation and concept and design work slightly differently in the open than on the enterprise side. In the enterprise side, there is a little bit more direct end client interaction, customers that inform the feature sets, the design of those feature sets, how should we do LDAP integration, etc. And the community, it comes through the SEP process. It comes from folks coming up and saying, hey, we're looking to start to use Salt for managing Kubernetes. Can we start to work around that? And of course, the concept may occur through the formation of a small work group, a small effort in designing that and taking that through the core team and working around that until we start to put some more dedicated effort around developing it. When we think through the develop to delivery, very simple notions around working in GitHub, and on the enterprise side, we work in GitLab. We reconcile those two. We have some automation and integration that goes behind the scenes, and we're constantly working to automate the QA side. And then finally, there is now much more rigor and discipline on declaring something ready only when it's done. It's development done, design and development done, it's documentation done, and it's delivery ready, meaning that the packages are there, they've been fully tested and so on and so forth before we push it into the final phase. Again, you can read through a lot of these details as we go through it, but it just gives you a little bit of a pretext. Now, one of the areas to deep dive into is the test side. Folks are more interested in understanding how does testing work, what do we do around that, and what discipline are we putting around it. It's important to recognize that when we think about test, we think of test as pre-development, into delivery, and then also post-development, and I'll come to talk about the post side in a moment. But early on, for example, on the call, we have Serena, who is one of our lead designers. We really, before we even start to work on something, we try and engage directly with sponsored users, and we review a lot of these designs with them. And we test a lot of those designs with them. And we say, and this isn't, by the way, UX in the source of just UI. This is UX as in a whole experience. So for example, one of the recent items that we've been working on is improving the debug and ongoing maintenance of the systems that are managed through Salt. And one of the things that we recognize is when you're working through a networking environment, the type of information that you may get is far richer than one you may get from a server, for example. And it's become very difficult and complicated for folk to understand where things went wrong or not. So Serena, or somebody like a Serena who is on our team, engages one or two of those folks, helps shape that, and we actually test the designs before we even write some of this code. Then we start to work around the prototypes, and then we go through unit testing, integration, performance, etc. It's important to understand that this project isn't born yesterday. It's 7 to 8 years. So while this picture looks clean and so on, it's riddled with debt, process debt, things that we didn't get right in the first place, and stuff that we need to address. For example, we don't do enough unit testing. For example, a lot of our integration tests are really not integration tests. For example, we don't really carry performance testing as its own category until more recently. So there's a lot of cleaning that needs to happen around flaky tests, creating a culture that develops more unit tests, creating real integration tests with golden scenarios that touch all the core components, creating a little bit of a separation. So if somebody wants to build an extension to solve, they don't need to worry about breaking the whole platform, but rather they understand the constraints, and we feel confident that if it runs and it's successfully working against one side, then it's not going to impact the other, which was, by the way, part of the inception of the POP model and using POP as an element of creating that extension, and so on and so forth. So this picture is clean, but we're not just dealing with starting from scratch. We're dealing with what did we have before, and how do we clean that up and improve it. We have a variety of principles that guide the QA process. So for example, we expect that a successful test run is a prerequisite to any PR to merge. You may think that, I'll tell you, that was not the case. We used to merge PRs when tests would fail. And we would not necessarily look at that as a community and say, did this test fail because it's a flaky test? Did it fail because something wrong with the system or so on? Because it was too time consuming and difficult to try and get to the bottom of it. You know, that was historic. We've done an incredible amount of progress since then to say, no, we feel confident now that when a test run is successful, it's giving us a good indicator, and therefore we should proceed with a merge and then run additional tests. We have a variety of other principles, for example, that if a test suite is failing, we will stop the pipeline. We would like to avoid that. That should go away in the future. But today we do that because unfortunately, once the test suite starts to fail, there is a compounded effect of additional failures. So it's better to stop, clean it up quickly, and then move forward. We're not yet at the mature stage where our pipelines can just run. We have plans to actually address that and some safeguards that allows the pipeline to continue to work without being impacted by a particular failure, and that we can roll that back. That's in our upcoming phase of things we can work through. We also have very specific standards around the tests that we've been running through these test clinics that the team is working through. So we're starting to think around best practices, and we've recently also onboarded a new team member, Andre, who's really a thought leader in the QA space, spent a career around that. And he's bringing sets of standards that allow us to understand how do you create a test, how do you know that this test is sufficient, making sure that some of the things that hurt us in the past, where a test runs and it doesn't clean up after itself, are eliminated, such that our tests that we're deploying are ones that are robust and we can rely on. Now, how does it work in practice from the PR to the test flow? This is a question we get often. Well, so once a PR is submitted, and not to kind of belabor the point, we have a PR test suite that runs. It currently runs in under 90 minutes. In the past, we used to run this against the multi-hour. Now we've made a change where we can run it against the fast test suite. If the fast test suite actually fails, then of course we go ahead and we determine, is this a test suite issue because of the debt that we've been carrying from the past? We have 11,000 tests. We have a test framework that is custom built. So is something go wrong in here? Let's check that. Is it a flaky test? Let's go fix it, and then we rerun it. If not, did we make sure that we get back with the PR submitter and let them know? If not, let's make sure that we do that. Because one of the issues we've had is that we don't necessarily communicate promptly back with the PR submitter. So let's make sure that we do that. If something did not fail, then the PR has passed the test. We do a review. Is this PR about to change something radical in the product? Is there something in the design that may affect others, etc.? Is there some changes required? By the way, sometimes we review the tests and we determine that the test is not sufficient. So we go back to the PR submitter and we say, these tests are good, they passed, but they're not sufficient to actually test the PR that you've implemented. Assuming all of that's passed, we go ahead and we put the merge label, we get it into the merge ready PR bucket list, We run it against the nightly test, which by the way used to take 9 hours, and we've halved that now to about 4 hours, including Windows amongst one of the ones that used to take longer. We've gotten that down to 4 hours and 6 minutes, and then of course we get it ready for the release. Within this particular process, it's important to understand that we also have a topology that runs in effect, and we're working through automating all of that. In the same lens that you're looking at, once the code, of course, is uploaded, we determine is this a PR build or is not. We go through the run fast test or run the full test, and then we essentially get up into the stage of when we're finally looking at it from a test pass yes algorithm on all of the test lens. That's when we go ahead and determine that a build is successful and we should promote it or not. And then we make that, of course, available. Similarly, it's important to understand that inside of our test infrastructure, we use things like Kitchen. We have set up virtual machines. And in the same process that we're improving the overall process flow, the tools and utilities that we use, we're also improving quite a bit of the infrastructure that supports those test runs. So we've done better with selecting and upgrading our EC2 instances, the VPCs, the images that we're updating. We've been working towards actually making more of those images less custom per build and essentially consolidating those, reducing the potential for error in there. And that's something that the core team is doing behind the scenes that may or may not have been exposed. And let me just be open about it, team. In general, folks, don't openly necessarily talk about all of the errors or the things that are not so good. And that's a cultural change we're making in our team and in our community. We are being very open about what's right and what's wrong, what's working and what's not. And I think we just need to be far more vocal about it and seek ideas and solicit input and be vocal as to why we chose a path that we went into, given the constraints that we have, which is where we're from and where we're trying to get to. Now, that gives you sort of an insight into the test flow process, what we're working towards, and it's coupled with a variety of changes that I'll come to describe momentarily. I want to also talk about the issues, things we find after we've delivered, because there's been a whole dialogue around that. Now, when we think about an issue, we also think about it from a QA perspective, i.e. we found something that we've been able to reproduce, we retest it inside of a real environment, and then we go through the full cycle again before we deliver a fix for that particular issue. From our point of view, we sit in there and we go, okay, an issue has been opened. Is there enough info? You'll be surprised by how many of the issues open lack enough information, which then opens up a time cycle of going back. Can you share with me? I cannot recreate it. I can't seem to find it. That cycle today for us as a community is taking too long. So we are thinking through, a couple of workshops, a couple of, best practice sessions around when you find an issue, how can you help all of us, shortcut that particular time so that we can work on identifying the issue, reproducing it as fast as we can. Once we've identified it, we look for duplicates. Is this the same as something else or not? We then decide, is this an actual bug? We then go into, okay, is this really a bug? Is it a question because, salt is being used in a way that's different than what it's intended? And maybe that's a new use case for us that we didn't think through. Is this gonna result in a new feature? Just the classic stuff. And then ultimately, if it's something bigger that requires us to change or reshape what we're doing, maybe we need to put it through a whole proposal. So we work through that particular process. Ultimately, if it's a simple bug that we work through, we give it the right label in terms of it's either approved, etc., and we put it into the GitHub cycle for us in terms of the releases. Now, one of the things that also has come up is the whole idea of labeling. Now, we've made some changes around the labeling of recent, because what we've discovered is when we went back out and we asked a variety of our community members, and we actually got a lot of response from many, many people, when we asked them, Are labels, are they good, are they not, are they complex or not? We found that, frankly, they're just complex and confusing. And they require people to have a deeper understanding than necessary. You know, we had the P labels, and then we had, is it critical or not? And then you had these sort of algorithms that you had to apply as to it gets worked on or not. So part of this was beyond being able to say this is a bug or a duplicate or an upstream bug or a question or so on, which allows us to then put it into the right sort of process channel. We simplified all of the issues down into, you know, critical, high, medium, and low. And we've essentially put some further definitions around what we think is critical and why we would work through that particular priority order, meaning things that get labeled as critical, then we'll go ahead and we'll address those, we'll prioritize them, and then we'll work our way down around high, medium, and low. Now, please understand, team, if you look at our status as of today as a community, new issues that have been coming in have had a much faster rate of being addressed than the current backlog that we have, that we may or may not get to in our lifetime. We have a huge backlog. Some of it is still relevant, some of it is not. Now, does that mean that we're just going to scrap all of that 1,700 or remove it? No, that's not the case. But it's also understandable that even a group of 17 people who are working on this will never have enough hours in the day to go and cull through all of them. So part of the process is a variety of actions, creating a bug fest where people bring the priority bugs for them that may have been labeled a P1 or P2 in the past, might have been mislabeled. They're actually stopping them from being able to use SOLT and were labeled low for some reason because of our complex algorithm. We'll bring those forward, flag them so that we can work on them together and fix them. So there's a variety of actions to try and tackle the backlog. But in a move forward state, whenever we're getting this bug list and we're triaging it, we're hitting it hard in terms of anything critical. It gets on top of our list work ahead of anything else. We fix it, and then we get down to the high. Mediums and lows, maybe we'll get to them, maybe we won't be able to get to them. But at the minimum, critical and high, we have to be able to actually resolve. And critical does block a release. So yes, we will stop to fix something that's critical. And high, we take real serious consideration to. We've actually, in some cases, delayed. We made a choice to delay in prior to sodium 1 or 2 releases because we've had high priority issues. So once, of course, it's assigned, it goes into a community core member. We work through the fixes. It goes through the test cycle. We make a determination where is the documentation change needed or not. We determine if there are some regression tests associated with it, you know, to ensure that the bug fix itself is not introducing another bug. So we do that by actually adding some regression tests and running against those. And then finally, we go ahead and, of course, get that particular issue resolved into it. Now, more recently, there's been dialogue around what about security testing? It's good that we have all these, you know, functional bugs and so on with the product. What about security, and what are we doing on that? Well, a couple of things. First is we have, you know, opened up our whole code base into things like LGTM. We have now instituted an annual pen testing. And more recently, following the last CVE, we commissioned our second full code audit that actually completed about 2 weeks ago. Full code audits cannot prevent CVE-like issues, of course, but what they do prevent is they make you aware of, you know, libraries that may inject vulnerabilities, existing CVEs and vulnerabilities that you may be susceptible to, licensing issues, and so on and so forth. We've actually ran through this, and we've identified a couple of issues that we want to work through and get addressed. The good news is nothing that we found in there has really put us in the, you know, oh my God, you have some big exposure in here. Most of them are libraries that we needed to update, and actually 3001.1 upgraded many of those libraries to make sure that we're working with the right levels. We have a couple of others ahead of us on Tornado, PyYAML, and so on that we need to work through. But we've commissioned that. And we also have commissioned an actual full-fledged CVE process that we follow that goes through a rigid identification of the CVE, working with the CVE submitter, running through the test, notification, and so on and so forth, taking into account learnings from the prior process. So for example, one of the learnings of, hey, if you're going to give patches for out of support versions, please don't put them behind a form, or don't use Mercato because that kind of even blocks the notification. So that's a learning, when we have an upcoming CVE release that we would have implemented as part of our retro on that particular process. So that's something that we went through. Lastly, performance testing is something that had not been recognized in its full-fledged discipline. We've actually hired several months back, again, a thought leader in the performance space, somebody that's actually used to run performance testing for the whole of the OpenStack suite, and has been bringing a lot of discipline about it. And we've essentially established a Salt Open and a Salt Open enterprise sort of combined paradigm that allows us to test behaviors of proxy minions, native minions, behaviors of the master to minion, etc., and including new environments in which Salt is being leveraged inside of containers, etc., etc. And again, at your leisure, you can see what are the type of things that we are looking for and testing against. So to wrap up around sort of the areas, if there is any message to walk away with, team, is that this community and this group is on a journey, and it's a journey of improvement and a journey towards excellence. We've taken a very pragmatic approach as opposed to a philosophical approach that says we have an issue, what can we do about it? What's the right solution given all the considerations that we have to take into account? And let's go about and take action on solving it. So one of the hardest things that we had to do was, for example, getting down into the simplification of all of our branches and the support for a multitude of versions. I will tell you that in my personal experience and knowing the nature of Salt and the amount of resources that we've put into it, that's a burden beyond any team to be able to manage. We had to simplify that to be able to take care of everything else. Managing 7 releases concurrently and going back, it's just, I honestly do not know anybody that do it. I've not seen it. I'm sure somebody has magically worked this out as a best practice somewhere, but not in OpenWhisk, not in Kafka, not in my Java days. I mean, I'm thinking of many projects, and I don't know any project that has anything beyond even 2. So this is a best practice that will allow us to get and force us to not get derailed by having to maintain too many things, but force us to get this sort of train model to work and work well. So that's a step that we've taken. There's a variety of other actions that we've taken in here. For example, the test infrastructure, that we don't ship until everything is green, and we know that green really means green, remove flaky tests, and so on and so forth. The bringing of Cassandra on board for us to help with communications and start to put that rigor on the open hours, the updates on Slack and IRC, and so on and so forth. And we don't think any of these is done deal. We think a lot of those as areas that are work in progress. We've made improvement, and we can do even more improvement around them. Now, in terms of focus areas for us, spend a minute around that. Packaging. Today, packaging, when you look at our release cycle, we reserve at least 2 weeks at the end of our release cycle that's dedicated into packaging across all of the platforms, manual testing, and then double checking on those packages, and then finally releasing. We have been learning through this particular process that we have the ability, if we adopt a different packaging approach, which is codenamed as Project Tiamat, that we will run an open hour as we had promised on once it's sort of matured enough and it's been worked with a few of the community members. That will allow us to kind of get the benefits that we see, frankly, in other projects that might use, the Go language, where you can build package it once and you can just pass it on and it works. We've experimented with the early concepts of Tiamat. We've used it for the native minions on Juniper and seen it work very successfully. So there's an effort in there to kind of simplify the packaging and fully automate all of that so that we don't get into this particular bottleneck at the end. And in fact, we want to produce the packages and promote them on a much, much more frequent basis so that somebody can work with the experimental part of our releases. Test factoring, we're very close to getting PyTest out and addressing the slow test. We have dedicated effort on addressing that. The PR backlog, we're going to mirror that with a bug fest to try and work on the priority bugs. So a call to action for all of us is, please understand the problem we all face with a big, huge backlog, and help us try and flag the ones that you care about, the ones that you think have the most prominent. You're not going to get pushback or resistance. You're not going to get opinions. We want your help to tell us which are the ones we should be focused on, flag them so that we can work on them. A lot around the release, clarity on the release. Sage has been culling through a variety of what I would call back office work to get us to a point where we can start to use things like milestones in GitHub and actually create boards where you can just simply go to the board and look at all the issues that are actually targeted for this release. Where are they? Have they been developed? Are they ready for QA? Where are they cycle? And just simplify and remove the mystery and mystique, behind what is actually in and out. So those boards, we have a variety of them that we've published, and we'll continue to do a couple of those again. Governance. We are, by the time we get into magnesium, gonna onboard people outside of the core team who will have the authority to do reviews, labeling, and also merge. We're targeting 6 to 10 folks, and we're open. If you're interested, please volunteer. Please come talk to us. The first group of people are going to include the workstream leaders, for example. Nick Hughes, who leads the cloud sort of work group. That group has the authority. They can review anything in there. They can label it, and if they want to merge it, go for it. Alan Cutler, who's outside of our group on the documentation, they want to review and they can do it. There isn't that sort of gate, and that's part of our transition process to opening up a lot of those efforts. So lastly, team, and again, please take I'm cognizant of time, look at a lot of these community goals and understand that's what drives us every day. Now, let's talk about a little bit of the questions that got raised, and I'm going to touch on a few of them. First one is, how do we get into a stable release cadence? So for those who have not been, who had not seen the wiki page or maybe have not had the opportunity to kind of think through it, this is how we think of ourselves. We have a very specific cadence. We will ship on February, June, and October. Next year, February 2021, we'll have the next release, June and October. That's the train for when we will deliver any major sort of new functions and features, including any bug fixes, issues, etc. And within that cycle, we will actually put support updates. So this, you can think of this as the .1, the .2, the .3, and then we would roll it into the next release. We do not believe that stable means that a patch-only release. That's not a model that we think is sustainable, frankly. There will always be bugs. Bugs can produce bugs, and features need to produce bugs. We believe that we need to improve our quality to the point that we have high confidence that even if we're introducing a feature, that it is not going to create bugs that cause regressions or so on, but that it's of high quality and it works, and it's not going to impact you or cause detriment for you. But we also recognize, which is why we make these dot releases available, that certain time wants to elapse before you want to upgrade or migrate. But that's the cycle we are on. And we'll continue to work through that particular cycle. And we're going to continue to honor an upgrade policy. Another question that had come in is, what's the point of, what did the label, SEP label do, and how can we implement it? I would like to recommend that we spend more time through that process, and we actually just talk about that particular. But in essence, I've hopefully covered part of this, which is the SEP process was intended to simplify so that we can make the labels easier. And I want to comment about how do we decide on implementing SEP in light of the community objections? And I just want to share a particular perspective. Today, my observation is when we've seen a particular SEP that had an overwhelming reaction, whether it's favorable or objection-wise, we've stopped. We've actually recently introduced a SEP and completely pulled it. The submitter pulled it because of the reaction. We will continue to work to understand any of the issues. We arbitrate them. We have a Friday meeting where we sit down as part of a core team and Tom, and we take the input very seriously, we examine it, and then we decide on what are we going to do with that. We are actually planning to extend and open the forum for SIP discussion into an advisory board. So again, if you're interested in helping shape SALT, discuss any of these SIPs, we will open that and we will actually allow folks to come in and participate and give input. I hope you are seeing the sentiment is that it's more and more opening up the project for contribution, input, and for us to set direction for it. Recognizing the time, I'm going to pause here for a moment and look for any questions from the folks who are on the call and live, and then I will continue for the purposes of the recording to actually talk about the other questions so that we can package this and shape it. I know, and I do apologize that we're over time. So Cassandra, let me lean into you and see, is there any question that has come up either from Twitch or in the chat that we should answer for the benefit of those who are on the call? And if not, maybe we can continue by recording this.
Yes, there are a couple questions from Krill. Let's see. Regarding SALT Open, it sounds great, but sometime before I asked if SALT Core team plans to write a doc about multi-sync configuration that is implemented but undocumented. The answer was no. Basically, the idea was if you want something like this, we have SALT Enterprise. I could understand that if the feature wasn't implemented, but it's implemented already. So he's still very confused by that.
That's a fair one, Carl. I will go and look into that specific particular issue. The general emphasis is not to say no. And obviously, if something is considered part of the enterprise value proposition or one of the unique things, there's a discussion with the product team around what we open up back into the open community and contributed. The general principle is that things get into the enterprise as a leading edge, and then they work their way back into the open community. But I will look into this particular issue, Carl, and I appreciate you bringing that up.
And then he had one more question.
Yes, please.
There was a comment in Slack that it was impossible to use any major SALT release in a while without eating for the 0.1 release. If you think SALT could benefit from spent a whole major release cycle for bug fixing only. I think that needs clarified.
That's another great comment and question, Carl. Thank you for that. So the path we're on is we're really working hard to remove the perception that a release is only stable or worth taking when it's a .1 or a .2. We are trying to work very hard towards a confidence level that says that, you know, when we ship magnesium or 3002, you should be able to take it and have confidence in it, and we'll make all the right sort of metrics available to you. Now, you cannot, to my earlier point, assert that or say that we're there yet without recognizing the deficit that we have. And so one of the deficits that we have is a large variety of issues. And so, yes, we are actually currently talking about dedicating perhaps a full release into just working on the bugs and crawling through that backlog and declaring that next release as the one that has addressed all of these issues. And that's a way to try and work through your backlog. So yes, we are considering, we are absolutely considering that, and we would be entertaining. And again, the secret here is to find out which are all the right bugs that we should focus on, and we'll need the community's help on that. Any other questions, Cassandra?
I do not see any other questions.
Okay, thank you. I recognize that we are over time, but for those who want to continue, thank you for that. And for those who have to drop, completely understand it, we'll make a recording available. So I'm gonna just take my time to finish this up so that, again, we can wrap it for our listeners or folks who are watching this afterwards. So relative to this question around the SEP, to wrap that up, we are opening up a community advisory board. Again, if you're interested, please be, raise your hand, be part of it. When a SEP comes in, we take every comment very seriously. Every Friday, we have a 2-hour meeting. We go diligently through the comments along a particular SEP. We study them. And then we decide, okay, is this SEP just a comment? Is this SEP a suggestion we should consider. Because remember, a SEP has come about because we're trying to solve a problem. It didn't just come about because it's a nice idea. And so we are still obligated to solve the problem that caused the SEP to occur in the first place. And so we consider it and we say, okay, well, this is good, but I don't think it will help us solve the problem, or I don't think this way of solving the problem is viable. And we go ahead and we should, which is not something we've been very good at. I'm the first to put my hand up, and we're going to all as a community work better on it, communicate back and say, here's why, this is what we think, and have that dialogue before we close off the SEP. So that's around SEP, and we'll continue to improve the SEP process. We want people to be part of it. It's a great way and a great governing mechanism for community to shape the project. With regards to the next one, which is how do we use GitHub labels to gain insights into the release status and blockers? To be honest, we all recognize that we have not been disciplined or have gone about using GitHub labels very well. And when I say that Sage has been working behind the scenes on a whole bunch of cleanup, it's because our labels are all over the place, just to be completely honest. And part of this is a discipline that says these are labels, these are the totality of our labels, here's the taxonomy of our labels and what they mean, and publish that. And Sage is helping us work through those. And labels become a source of how we actually build our boards. Because when you have a label that says this is targeted for aluminum, you automatically know it's good, this PR has come in, it's targeted for aluminum. Targeted versus confirmed gives you a different feel. Okay, I know it's aluminum and I know it's confirmed. It's absolutely been triaged and or assigned, and somebody's going to be working with it with a community member, or the PR itself that's been submitted is going to make it in because it has all the prerequisite tests and so on and so forth. And again, I recommend that we will have that as a follow-up part of our dialogue in terms of just a focus session on labels. So thank you for that question. The next one that came in is why does SALT want only 1 point release between each feature release? I just want to clarify, we don't have a policy of only one. We know that we almost certainly, given the status of our test infrastructure, so are going to need one. We almost know that we're going to need a .1 until we get into that level of quality and confidence. But we are never opposed to doing a .2 or a .3. There is a point in time where the cost of putting something is surpassed by you just moving it into the next sort of train. And I want to just talk for a moment about trains and the use of that. And I don't mean to derail us, but the word train is not accidental. These types of logistics of release management and so on are not unique to our industry. They're dealt with in every other industry. Airplanes, you know, have to deal with issues that come up, schedules, weather, pilot that's late, maintenance issue and so on, trains and traffic control systems and so on and so forth. And I had a chance to once work with a great colleague called Carl Fogel, who's worked on a variety of open source projects. And he reminded me of how trains tend to lend themselves better towards open source projects. And the idea with the train is that at some point in time, when there is an issue with the train or the track, you recognize that you need to stop the train and you tell the passengers, sorry, the train is going to stop at this junction. Please, get off of this train and go to track number 2 or track number 3 and join that train. And that will take you to your destination. Because the logistics of putting 2 or 3 trains or scheduling a new train on a track is difficult. The track is fixed and there are logistics associated with safety and so on and so forth. And that's similar why we call this a train. Our approach is less about airplanes, which just says, okay, their airplane was delayed. We still have enough to run both airplanes. The 3:50 p.m. airplane and the 4 p.m. airplane are both going to depart. We're not in an airplane infrastructure yet. We're still in a train infrastructure mode, which is why we're working with this methodology. Fix the problems that we have, get us into confident cadence that we can stand by, create more velocity and get our backlog of debt and issues behind us. And then we can start to say, oh, maybe we can tackle these issues differently. So I just took this detour about trains to try and just illustrate that point. So That's why at some point in time, if it takes us long to get to a .2 or a .3 and the next release, we just roll all these fixes forward and say, we're going to fix these things in magnesium or in aluminum, because that's sort of the next junction, and there isn't enough runway or time to actually try and get the resources we have and get them to work on that. And again, I'm being very transparent, team, because that's what a community is. We're open and we're transparent with recognizing where our deficiencies and issues are. Why did we change to a single branch? I've hopefully addressed that earlier on, but given all of what we just discussed, I think one with a closer analysis will understand that that's probably the most pragmatic and sensible approach for us before we choose to go different. There are talk about, perhaps, dealing back with more branches and trunks and trunk-based development. I will be honest to admit, I don't see anything wrong with those approaches. I just do not believe that we're organized and or our infrastructure can sustain that without causing more problems and more sort of difficulties. So we've bit the bullet. We're going to go down this and we're going to double down on investing in automation and all the right infrastructure. And we seek everybody's help to get us there. If you see something that needs to be changed, call it out and we'll work on it. Do we have a CI/CD pipeline? Absolutely, we do. And we're on that. And we can, again, not only what we described earlier, we can go through a whole session to talk about that in detail. Curl and Bryce and team can take you through that. And can we improve triage? Yes, triage is one of those places that we have not yet tackled, I think, efficiently. And there's work effort underway that Sage is championing for us to help us through that. Another question came up: how can a contributor understand the big picture plan so that we can contribute more? What is our product strategy? What is the release plan schedule? I'll start with the last one. I hope that we've covered the release plan and schedule through what we described earlier. October is when magnesium is coming in. February is when coming in. I know that we've had maybe 1 week out and so on, but that's wildly different from the past, where we were out for 6 months or 8 months, or even one time I was told we're out for a year. Being a week out, what we need to just do is help communicate and let people know. And what we're getting to is a discipline that says, if it's ready, it makes it. If it's not ready, it's moving on to the next sort of train. But the train will arrive at the station on this date. So hopefully we'll continue to improve that and we'll get our times much more punctual around that side. In terms of the big picture, one of the things that we're recognizing is that we've not done a great job on bringing back Alex, who's the head of our product, and Tom to the forefront of the dialogue. So we're going to start to schedule them more. You'll find that Tom's recent emphasis has been more around the innovation side. There's a side that we don't hear or is not vocal in our Slack channels, but believe me, they are vocal to us. We get them through direct DMs or emails or sessions that they call for, that phone calls that they request, which is innovating in the front. How can I extend SALT without having to deal with all of this? That's come from a variety of our community members. So the whole inception of POP and being able to create, Heist on top of POP as a standalone project or other projects as an example. Moving more towards making SALT a platform that manages infrastructure, not only a subset of infrastructure, but recognize that, cloud is real and we need to nurture that and accelerate and put resources. That's an example of type of the big picture we want to work towards. Are we going to do more things? Yes. The big picture isn't just features and functions. The big picture is releases, release structure, community contribution and governance, and we'll continue to do more around that. Lastly, come around do non-critical bugs only get fixed with feature releases? If so, what happens when it makes someone unable to use SALT for months? Why continue adding features when there are still bugs and we keep introducing more without resolving them? And it goes around a lot of that. I think we've talked quite a bit around this. I will just say that we don't have a hard line that says, non-critical bugs get fixed only in feature releases. The truth of the matter is today, non-critical bugs are not getting solved full stop. That's the truth. We just have a big backlog that we want to tackle through. The way we tackle that backlog, as I said, is prioritization, make it easier for people to submit, fixes to those things and run them faster through the process, shorten that cycle, put concerted effort to try and bring down the backlog and get ourselves in phase. Once we've tackled that, if you look at new bugs that are coming in, if we want to prioritize those and we punch on them. So for example, if Dimitri wakes up one morning or Chad or so on and they've tackled a whole bunch of things, they're sitting in there. They just pick them up and they work on them with whoever submitted them and get that going. So there isn't a hard rule that says we do not fix non-critical bugs. With regards to something that stops somebody from using Salt, I consider that as falling in the paper cut category. And we need to do a better job at labeling those paper cuts, because there is the glaring critical regression, Salt won't start, blah, blah. But there are the types that stop you from using it. And for us, we want to flag those. We want to give them the right label and say, maybe these variety of 3-4 things are stopping you. So flag them. Being able to use Salt is a critical item and a priority. So flag those so we can actually get those addressed.
Yeah, and if I can just put a plug in really quickly, we're also working to, we do have a finite amount of resources. So there are times that we have to just take what we've got and we want to label something as critical. We know that this needs our attention, but we also know that it's not going to get fixed in this point release or this feature release or wherever we are in whatever release cycle due to, the problem that it poses and the finite resources and other critical bugs that are in the backlog and things that we're trying to focus on. So each one is individual and we're trying to treat it as such. The one that we're citing in here is actually something that we still haven't figured out what's wrong yet. So we know that it's critical, but we don't know exactly what it is. So those things we also want to take care and pay attention to and not hold up a release for where we have other fixes ready to go, but to continue to work and make that the correct fix. So we're trying to make a conscious effort there to also make it more stable and to make that better as well.
Thank you for that, Sage. That's a great clarification. I'm going to round off and close this off with the last thing, which is we have some great suggestions coming in. Max made a suggestion that we do public retros. So we'll actually go ahead and do that. We will facilitate a session at the end of every release. We'll do a public retro on it. We'll gather the feedback, talk about the grouping of the issues, and what do we want to sort of start, stop, or continue. And we'll work through that model. With that, folks, I really appreciate everybody who's helped us bring attention. Please understand that none of the comments, none of the questions are seen in any light other than a thank you light and one of gratitude. And we're all working to make Salt the wonderful project, the fun project, the project that we're proud to put our name on and say that we've been part of it and we contributed to it. And so your comments, your passion, your perseverance and persistence to make it better, it just drives us and motivates us to actually continue to do that. So one more round of, let's see if there are any other questions.
There's one.
Yeah, what came in addition?
From Mike Place. Hi Mo, thanks for the conversation. Could you please clarify your statement about never doing releases with critical bugs? For example, the most recent release was released with critical bugs, which appear to be labeled as magnesium. Do you mean by your statement that you're only referring to regressions, or do you mean all critical bugs?
No, actually, I appreciate Mike Place putting me in my place, pardon the pun, on that one, because it's the right comment. I use the word critical in here in the wrong order, not the labeling order. So in this case, I meant regressions and so on. If something is considered as critical, we absolutely work on making sure that we address it, because critical today is the highest level, and high priority issues, which is what I intended to mean, those we make a decision on as to, does it really impact a lot? Is it situational? Can we fix it? For this particular issue, 57543, that's one actually that is on our RCA, or root cause analysis, as to why we missed it. I want us to recognize, team, that today we're not at the robust level of following all of these processes. We have certain PRs that people have put in that escaped the board. And we're doing root cause analysis and saying, why did that happen? How do we fix it? And how do we make sure that that doesn't happen again? We've had, for example, in 3001.1, you noticed we identified an issue with the Windows packages that caused a one-day delay. Well, why did that happen? Why did we catch it late? Was it a freak situation or so on? So this falls into that category, Mike, and we will address it. I'm also going to take a takeaway from your question that we're going to attribute labels more directly into how we handle the labels. So that's something Sage, myself, and the core team will take, which is in publishing the taxonomy in our labels, we're going to actually get very rigid on what does a critical thing mean. It means it will stop another release. Thank you for that. Any other questions?
I don't see any other questions in Zoom or Twitch.
Let me close by apologizing for having to listen to me for an hour and 15 minutes. You're tolerating me more than my kids would. They give me about 5 minutes before they completely go blank on me. So thank you, everybody, and thank you, Cassandra, for inviting me to cover this topic. And as always, team, much appreciation and gratitude for all the comments and for all the questions. And this isn't a one-time discussion. This is an ongoing dialogue that we'll go through. So thank you. And if there are any questions afterwards, please feel free to reach out, or we'll cover them at our next junctions. Thank you, Cassandra.
Thank you. One last quick thing. So next week, we also have kind of a very focused topic for the open hour. We're going to be talking about working groups, kind of what working groups are active, what working groups might we want to start, what working group should we maybe disband or make inactive. So if you're a working group leader or you're interested in learning more about working groups, be sure to attend that meeting next week, and I will be reaching out to our working group leaders individually to make sure they don't miss that message. And that's it. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you all next week.